Live. Okay, we're now live. The VillageLab team. I'm going to give the context for today's conversation. So, one of the concepts that has been constantly present as we have is the context of vision-driven organizations. And even though we haven't got together, we have a certain understanding of what it means and define it. It's constantly present during our times together. And there is now a document that Ben has created and been very, very detailed in what a wisdom-driven organization work can look like in many of its aspects. So to give a small description that's part of that document, it says wisdom-driven organization is a philosophy of co-creation where the highest common good is realized through an organic process of collective wisdom and collaborative action. You'll see a link to that document because there has been some conversations that are already happening there, and all are invited to continue the conversation and further the work. So that's part of the context, the work that Ben began, and Ben and I began to think, how would a wealth acknowledgement system look like? And what are the components? What is that we want to measure and track and account for in the ways that we generate and measure and create wealth together in the world? The other part of the context is that after meeting Kevin in the Thriving and Resilient Communities Laboratory, we rapidly identified that we wanted to collaborate together in creating consciously a conscious culture, creating the VillageLab culture in a conscious way. And that we wanted to take from his experience of working with Gore, who is an organization that is modeling new forms of self-management and leadership and decision-making that is quite impressive. And so we started the conversation with us, Kevin and I, sharing what the board has done, but then rapidly morphing into what is that we could do to create a culture map for VillageLab, not a culture map, but a culture, and then, of course, have a map that's not the territory, but it needs to give us a way to navigate and consciously create our culture. And we also spoke that our wealth together, our value creation, is that we are giving as well Kevin a field on where to play, because he is changing his career into becoming this organizational alchemist, designer, architect, and we are doing that work. So we're providing a playing field, as well as we know that we want to, whatever we create together, and we discuss live together, and then whoever comes after, we want to share as an open source. And we would really love to create some tools that would help others to then build conscious culture within and wisdom-driven organizations. So it's a large work, large body of work. And so within our conversations that we have with Kevin, and Ben has been very aware as well of what we create and the hackpad and meeting notes. We chose to start by speaking about our beliefs and principles and values and disciplines and practices, and what is the kind of culture that we want to create. So this is the context for today. I want to see if I'm reading something out. Well, it's that the intention is to begin the conversation. We're not going to have all those described now, all the elements of culture, but we will begin to reveal and unfold what is important to us, what matters to us. And I see that there is a chat space. If you don't have it open, you can open it in the first link in the navigation bar in the left side. and that is the link to the document we will use to harvest our session today. So with that, I'm complete, and I would like to then ask Kevin to give us the context of culture and the different elements of culture.
Yeah, so thanks, Fernanda, for creating some context. As you said, it is something that I found my passion in my previous work coming from engineering and working on a business team. I eventually kind of found this passion for culture, and it's really, I think, a powerful thing. I mean, the definition that I put in the pre-work and the definition that I think is meaningful for me and is that organizational culture is what it is an elemental medium for organizational growth. So similar to a medium that exists for a biological living material where you put the material in a medium and it helps the material grow, culture kind of creates the same container for an organization, or can create the same container. And with the right elements, the culture can be a great medium for organizational growth. But it depends on what the organization is wanting to get out of its culture. Some of the basic elements that underlie and I hope we could talk about more today, are the beliefs that the individuals are bringing to the organization, um, and the values the individuals are bringing, because those create for the organization, the context of like an organizational consciousness. And the living social organism is kind of a good analogy, with your individual beliefs and your individual values, using your collective wisdom to emerge what the beliefs of the organization are and what the values of the organization are, creates this container that individuals can come into, in a space to enact those beliefs and values in a organizational way through choosing principles and disciplines and practices that help to support the organizational purpose. So for VillageLab, I think the purpose that Fernanda and I have been talking about, and a little bit from Jeff in the past few months, I think there's something really important that VillageLab is looking to do, and I'm excited about trying to help create this space or container for VillageLab's success. So that's my personal excitement. Does that I can't recall, Fernanda, is that that was the context, right?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. That's much the context. I would like to give space for Ben to share what has been the context of the work he's been creating with the Wisdom-Driven Organization document, so that we have all in the center of what has been the work so far.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, you could give some part of the context and where you're at in regards to that work.
Sure. Does my sound okay for you guys? Okay. Let's see. I'm fascinated by, well, obviously I think we all recognize the importance or the potential power, magic, synergy that is this force, this collective being, presence, awareness that comes together amidst a group of shared intent and common field of operation and engagement. And I, for a while, have been approaching different, interested in how to bring that into more conscious, explicit, or workable space in the midst of a group, and something that becomes not so much like a rigid, like a a, a rule system or something that's pinned up on the board that you point to when somebody asks what's this group about. It's like not a fixed thing, but ways to surface what are the aspects, what are the dynamics, what are like the physics within a group or a collective, a community space, and how to be able to consciously engage with that stuff on a little more what you might call meta level, that gets beyond some of the more conventional or um, habitual ways that people engage with that stuff and the dynamics there, and actually look at what are the dynamics and the forces and the tendencies and the patterns that are observable there, and how can we interact with those to actually shape and nurture and direct steer this group organism. And so a lot of my work or interest has gone into how to, what is a good way to make that stuff visible, and then to work with it in amidst a group space. And a lot of that comes down to just a basic, kind of what we're talking about here, mapping, this idea of putting the pieces, the patterns out on the table in a way that we can see them and come to a shared understanding of them, and then work with them. And then how do we actually recognize what are some of these patterns? And that gets to a almost like philosophical, psychological level of inquiry to how to understand these group dynamics and forces and the mechanisms that work there. And so I've been playing with a tool called MetaMaps. I think most of you have probably seen that as a one canvas to work on and throw those pieces, those patterns, that pattern language really out onto a shared workspace and create these diagrams that show how things may fit together or work in a systemic fashion. And then the other piece of that is actually working to develop this idea of a pattern language and how to identify in a way that's meaningful for all the participants what are these different features and forces and such. And so anyways, that's what I've been playing with and continue to evolve. And I should also mention this idea of open value network, which is something that I've been working with in the group that's building and producing the MetaMaps project. And we picked that up from another group in Montreal that's doing open source hardware, and it's a model for what's being called commons-based peer production, and that's an approach to sort of an open source economy where people can agilely, transparently gather around different project spaces and contribute in a way that's clearly acknowledged and accounted, and then as value or returns come back from that work, it's fairly evenly, fairly and transparently distributed back to the contributors. And so looking at ways to do that kind of accounting and agile collaboration, and then some of the governance questions that come up around that in these more coherent bodies, or around the idea of like a brand or a formal legal organization. So how do you actually add a governance layer where that's needed? And so again, this is all part of a growing pattern language that I've been playing with in a couple spaces, and excited to throw around here with you all and see what makes sense and what kind of useful maps come out of that for us to work with. And yeah, totally encourage, if we don't get to it today, at some point soon, for everyone to play with MetaMaps a little bit as a nice tool for exploring these ideas and the relationships that come out of the conversations like this.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, I think that, there's several MetaMaps that Ben has begun, and we will continue to work with that tool as we move further. So thank you for bringing this center. It's 2:45, so we have an hour and 15 minutes, and do I feel cold like to hear from, or not even though I feel cold to hear from Jeff and from Carl, how does this topic follow you? and perhaps to try to be very brief, so then we then go directly into the work of the culture. And yes, so Carl, if you would like to start by sharing how does this topic for you, and how you been relating to it in the context, when we relate to it in the context of VillageLab.
Yeah, thanks, Fernanda. I think I caught it. The first part of what you said was a little hard for me to understand with something on the mic. But what draws me, what pulls me in this topic? A lot of my exploration over the years has been in pretty intimate scale, what I call transformational learning communities. So sometimes residential communities like the house and community I live in right now, and also teams like the Cultural Catalyst Network that I've pulled together here in Seattle. And so I'm really drawn to the intuitive, emergent ways that I find myself definitely taking principles, let's say like interdependence and empathy and authenticity, vulnerability, those principles, but like how do we live them out, and how do we begin to feel in our own like cellular structure almost what it's like to drop into a field energetically with other people in a way that is letting go of business as usual and our inherited assumptions, and allows us to drop into a much more transpersonal space with other people, not just from a conceptual place, but from a felt place of, okay, in this moment, as Kevin's saying something, can I really be fully in the experience of that listening and trusting that spirit or wisdom or life is coming through this person in that moment. And even as I'm speaking right now, can I, rather than thinking concepts and then taking those concepts and putting them into words, can I let the words arise out of being present to the exploration? So that's something I'm finding fascinating. The other thing I'll share that comes to me when I think what draws me to organizational culture exploration is more and more what I'm realizing is what I would call the importance of shadow work, and the recognition of where our personal psychology and histories leads to places where there's contraction or frozenness and blind spots in any one individual's capacity to see the wholeness of what's happening. And the importance of a collective field where we're consciously working with those stuck places in the individual psyche so that we can really liberate the full capacity of a collective. And the kind of humility and deep authenticity it takes to liberate that degree of collective capacity and wisdom. So those are just some things that excite me. I'll keep it there. I could go on and on, but fun to be here. Thanks.
That's great.
So, oops. Okay. I'm in tears. All I have to do is say what they said. It's like that practice of sitting in circle together and feeling the one mind, feeling the telepathy of people is, to me, is the most fulfilling, beautiful thing I've experienced. And I experienced it serious quite a lot. I've experienced it in a lot of communities. And what Carl just said is just like so perfect. And I was reading Ben's document earlier, and just, it's like to work with people that get it, and you know it's beyond the words. It's the ability for us to sense that collective mind, that collective emotion, that collective feeling, and I just feel it with all of you, and I'm just really honored, and it's like, maybe you've heard me say before, like, probably like the way I consider the social body and the political body and the ecological body, they're all like bodies of the spirit, of the collective spirit, just like we have esoteric bodies. And so for me, this, what draws me to this subject, it's like, it's one of the bodies. I mean, how could you not have one of the bodies? And it's one of the most essential bodies. I don't need to go on, because what Carl just articulated is perfect, and what Ben articulated in the paper is perfect, and what Kevin's pulling together from adapting the Boer work and Fernanda, it's just, I'm in bliss with this kind of subject. So that's me.
Good. Thank you all. So that pretty much sets our context on the field. And I want to invite Kevin to give us a very brief overview about the elements, because the document was then delayed, so most people didn't have the opportunity to hear the distinctions. And I would want to invite a very brief description of the distinctions in between, beliefs and values and principles and disciplines and practices, as a way to set our context. Once we have heard that, we will go into the hackpad and we'll have a silent moment together. We'll have 5 minutes to alone together to be able to write in the hackpad. And as Jeff and I started to do the work before to see what emerged for us, and so we decided to prepare a document that had all the 5 elements, even though we're mainly focusing on beliefs. But we decided to put them all because sometimes something emerged and we said, oh, but wait, that's a belief value, or that's really like the principle. And so those conversations are partly invited right now. Like, we get really clear on what we name as, even though they have so much similarities among them. So starting the conversation, can Kevin come and set that context in the distinctions? And then we'll have that time alone to work on the beliefs, and from that part of the beliefs, then we can start working on values and principles as we feel they arise in our consciousness. I'm complete.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Fernanda. The model is obviously, like all of us, in some sort of evolution, but the way that I've approached it here, and I'm wanting to host our conversation around, is the concept of beliefs being really the fundamental element of culture, because they come from a place of your individual understandings of the world, and those again come from a place of your individual experiences. So you have stories in your mind that underlie beliefs, and by speaking those stories and sharing them, there can be what I think Carl actually was talking about, some type of, and Jeff a little bit too, some collective emergence of what are the beliefs that feel right for VillageLab, and what is it that VillageLab as a social organism believes. So those stories will become not just your individual stories, but they will become the stories of VillageLab. And as you work through that process, it can use the same process to kind of figure out, well, beliefs are a part of your internal consciousness, and so are values, but principles and disciplines kind of become part of your internal physics, in the way that Ben described it, like the physics of the internal organization, and somewhat of how the organization interacts with the larger ecosystem. So I think that's a little bit of context for me as to what I'm hoping we can go into now, is just having a chance to think about stories, think about beliefs, and in the context of Village Lab, what are the beliefs that are meaningful?
Thank you, Kevin. So as part of the process, what we have is like, are you all in the VillageLab Culture up together? And I think I might want to screen share it here so that as part of our memory we have that um, seeing of the document itself and how it's been built by all of us. Without, of course, the idea is each of us has it open. And does everybody have it like open? Yes? Cool. Okay. Me, no, I don't have it open. Okay, okay. So as you said, as you can see, we wrote Village Lab Culture elements. And in the right column, you can see that there is a navigation bar. So you can move very fast in between beliefs, value list, and disciplines list, and practices list. So sometimes you feel like, oh my God, is this a value? And you want to write it fast instead of doing scanning up and down. You can be moving through the navigation bar as I'm doing now, right? Especially as we populate it. The first things that you see already populated here is because Jeff and I wanted to start creating the field for our time together, so we started to put some of the list of our own beliefs. So it's kind of the pre-work that we did together. So I'm gonna, if there's any questions before I ring the bell and allow for 5 minutes for us to be able to write beliefs, and as well, if you sense that that's a value or a principle you're not clear, just write it down, because after we would go in conversation about all these topics. Is there any question? No? No, everybody said no, you will hear. Okay, so I'm gonna ring the bell, and we have 5 minutes. The bell will begin as well after 5 minutes. Here, rah. In a second. Okay, here we go. So all invited to play. Thank you. So I was asking, anybody need more time? I rang the bell and started speaking, and I was muted the whole time. I'm gonna stop the screen sharing for now. I gave my best speech, and I wasn't muted. So I was saying that this is a work in progress, and that we are creating a first list, and that we hope that this becomes an organic process for Village Lab as it keeps growing into guilds and welcoming more people into our team and into the periphery and the center. And so I would love to invite us to start the conversation now around those beliefs. And as you might have felt it in the experience of creating the list of beliefs, you really had to go into, oh, that's a value, that's a discipline, that's a practice. And so it was more like non-linear rather than a linear process of working on beliefs and values, and first beliefs and then values. And then so we want to start speaking about beliefs, and that each of us has space about the beliefs they have written, and connected to what would be the value or the principle or the practice or the discipline that connects to that belief. Would that be a good sense? I want to sense the whole, because we designed so far, because we wanted to have a organic sense of what was happening, and then ask the center if that's so. Is that a good place where to move now in the conversation? Start sharing each of us beliefs and then connecting it to the rest of the elements?
Yeah, that sounds good. I can give a context. In the example you just gave, Fernanda, the belief around freedom and creative power of sovereign individuals, for me, connects with a principle of commitment, that individuals are free to commit to things themselves. Just like they are in life, individuals are free to go as they choose, free to do what they want. But the expectation, at least in a community, is that you keep your commitments, or you try to renegotiate your commitments if you can't meet the commitment you made originally. So the freedom connects to the principle of commitment, and those two together kind of create a system of governance in a way. So as the commitment principle is upheld, individuals also maintain freedom.
Thank you. That works very, very well for me. And so would we want to then spiral into our beliefs and the ones we mentioned, and how it connects to then the value and the principle, to the different elements? Doesn't have to be all elements, but what does it speak to you as the stories for that? And the floor is open.
I can go. Whoops. So, we wrote together, Fernando and I wrote the wealth as life creation and generating value in each interaction. And for me, that practice, that belief that and embodying the metacurrency principles and really believing in a multi-level and multi-type system of wealth, it changes like every interaction we do. So the practice is that every time we're talking to someone, we're looking to create the most wealth. And it's it's huge. I mean, it's changed my life in some ways. And it really works. You know, when we enter almost every business meeting we have, we're looking to meet the other person's needs first. And it just kind of changes the whole vibe away from negotiation and into this service role and into wealth creation, into value creation. And it sets that context. So that's for me is a real direct link. I'm complete.
Yes, I want to complete that, what Jeff just said, as wealth as life creation. For me, it's like a compass, like of how I want to live my life, as you know, whatever that I do and what I have and what I am, that generates wealth for me and for others and for the planet. And it's really about the true, good, and beautiful. And it's also an invitation for when we're with potential partners or other communities or what we might call client, to see, okay, what is the wealth that we are creating together, and be able to super consciously speak about the intangible wealth, so that it is not any longer invisible, but actually made visible. And yeah, and we don't have to worry about capturing all these because we are recording the session. So I'll make sure to harvest it afterwards and complete.
Something that really resonated
Yeah, I think I
with me.
want to complete that again because I didn't really speak about the. Yeah, I guess that this belief of the wealth as life creation, probably one of the practices, and that is a question for me, is would be a value accounting and wealth acknowledgement. Complete.
Something that really resonated with me is something Carl wrote here. It says, consciousness underlies, filters, and shapes reality. And that sounds like a belief. It's believed to be true. I believe it to be true, but I think it's, to me, it really speaks to a very large scale, almost, I mean, beyond meta, just, that's I think it just kind of jumped out at me as being a very connecting belief.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I mean, maybe I'll just speak from there a little bit. It's, yeah, I did find myself going somewhat to the real meta level, because it's exciting for me to then, I was just thinking about, okay, where does that, I mean, I'm experiencing it in terms of stories, I experience it on a daily basis. It's like, oh, like, what's the impact of meditating for an hour in the morning? And boy, oh boy, do I realize the difference. Yeah, and then how does that impact our collective action if we're cultivating that ability to be witnessing, you know, the in the more transpersonal or witness consciousness. Yeah, so just excited about that. It feels like an amplifying practice in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's definitely exciting, I think.
Thank you, Carl, because that for me is so important. Like, where is the distinction between the practices of the I that benefit the we, and that, of course, it influences the E, right? And so for me, like one of the things that I always said when I started to think about living in communities, like I want to live in a community where people practice meditation, where people practice mindfulness, where people practice, and they go into shadow, because that way we'll be much more happy and wise together. Like I find it as a fundamental piece in the culture I would love to see created in VillageLab.
Fernanda went on mute. Oh.
No.
No, I was asking Jeff that he gives me a cue when he wants to speak, so that you don't have the bouncing echo word.
The other thing that Jeff wrote a comment about, it, something Carl just said, is it's also connecting to me to the story piece, is the practice of meditating each day and having it be a transformative experience. Is connecting to the that's a story that helps support the belief. You can have the belief, but it's hard to really believe something unless you actually have the experiences individually to support. I mean, you can understand it conceptually, but to really believe it's true is something different for me. And I think that's getting at the story part that's really important.
My qu-
Well, go ahead.
how do we make it part of a culture if we say yes, mindfulness and meditation is important practice? Do we help each other to do that? Would we have a way in which we support? Maybe I say, I'll start by 2 minutes, and that is fine. Or do we want to create a field of support? And yeah, so that we don't have to kind of solve it now. It just came to me as part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think what the distinction you're bringing up for me is that these things are all connected. So, believing in the consciousness, and then having a practice of mindfulness or a discipline of mindfulness, whether it's a discipline or a practice, like those things they're connected. So, where do they fall in the culture? I think is going to be somewhat, for me, related to how important, how fundamental are they? Beliefs being really, really fundamental, and principles being, almost equally as fundamental in terms of setting the governance, setting the kind of the physics of the organization up. So I think that's a piece to think about, and they do connect. So I think it has a natural kind of, it's easy to have a belief and then immediately think of a discipline or practice that would come from that.
Ben, do you want to share about any of the beliefs you've written or any of the other elements, so that we have a spiral of everything on the basis?
I don't have anything in mind particularly. I think the point that's coming up for me at this stage is the sense of wanting to put this onto a map again and make it more of a nonlinear workspace that we could draw some of the connections, and I think the sense of a process that comes to mind for me is to build, as Kevin was saying, the story, the context, individual context around these beliefs and other pieces of the picture, and to move from there towards a shared understanding of maybe slightly different labels, but this idea of a pattern language where we come to shared understanding of these resonant, patterns, and however we see fit to label them. It's like kind of iterating through this list to where we have a fairly clear, complete, or first draft list of these core beliefs that then become a reference point that we can start to work with, and a little further on, build even currencies around, or just buckets to keep track. A key thing for me, just reflecting a little bit on past experience with sort of culture craft and visioning with groups, is a lot of times it stays on the very projective, prospective, forward-looking, intentional plane, and doesn't. It's not commonplace or easy to keep completing the loop and then bring back the actual practices and habits that are being lived and embodied in the organization. Like, bring that back onto the map and see how that really lines up, and keep iterating that way by really tracking what's happening, what people are observing and experiencing, and bring that tight feedback loop into the map as well, and see how that informs our picture, our map of the territory, as it were, in this culture space. I'm happy to say a little about any.
I think Ben and I are both visual learners for sure. Maybe some others. I would love, when I was reading this and started to see that each section is connected, or like the beliefs are connected to a principle or a practice, and I immediately wanted to start mapping it on some sort of graphic interface tool. And then what else happened is, just as this work was happening amongst us in the last few days, we got an email from one of our prime partners, that they wanted us to facilitate part of this process for them. And we're like, oh, here we are developing it. Here's the tool for ourselves, and I need that map quick now. So I'm loving the fact that that Ben is sitting there and just not comfortable with a list, because it's like that's that cutting edge that we are, is to go beyond and find the ways that we can really create these wisdom maps, these wisdom understandings in a way that we can really bring to others. So I'm really loving, I just want to give a total ditto to what Ben said about mapping it, and also some sort of process for feeding back how are our practices and disciplines working, and get that feedback loop built into this process. So I'm really excited about taking this beginning and going there. So that's me, complete.
Thank you, Jeff. So yeah, for me, it's really beautiful that instead of keeping going into the list, because the process seemed like slow and we were trying to get into it, but to think about process, because as Village Lab, this is one of the areas we want to help others, and we wanted to create a process that would be fun and interactive, and in some part of your sharing, Ben, you said stories, right? Where are the context and the stories for those beliefs? And Carl, you start to share the story in the part of how consciousness and inner reflection for the external, and then okay, here we are into story, and that resonated with others and started a conversation. So in regards to process, I love to speak more about process and what is that we see could be a juicy process to move this as a tool, as well as to practice it in ourselves. So I'm very interested in your experience, Carl, and as you're an incredible process artist, and what is that you see, and which can and I love what Ben mentioned about creating the map, and then maybe we work like that, but what wants to emerge in our center is my question right now.
I'll give another example. the value, and this one specifically coming from Gore, so just preface it with that, in valuing contribution, and I'll change the words a little bit. Contribution drives compensation, or contribution drives some type of feedback, is a value that can enact a practice. So the practice of building contribution currency, or building reputation currency, or whatever type of currency, can then have a practice where it comes back through some loop. So I think for me it's connecting to, it's not the same as a belief, it's more about a value, and then a value connecting to a practice. So I just want to throw that out there as a context thing and an example to think about.
Yeah, I notice I'm intrigued by the um, fine grainedness of the distinction of these 5 different levels of abstraction to specificity, and I see the truth in the distinctions, and I do find it intriguing that this degree of fine grainedness of verbal distinction, how that interfaces with a collective process, like just in terms of like where's that snappy flow of easily grasped, kind of like, it's almost like playing with a big colorful ball, that you can bounce around among a group of people, versus like trying to juggle ball bearings, or something like that with a group of people. And so there's something about like a big colorful ball that we can bounce around. I think I'm just saying in a different way what we were speaking to in terms of process and something like that. So I'm just trying to hone in on it, but that's what I'm coming up with so far.
No, I love that. Thank you, Carl. I think that's something that I so appreciate the kind of feedback as we're talking through this. I mean, this is for me kind of one of the first times I've tried to break this apart into elements and then expand them beyond what I knew working at Gore. But I think there's some really well-developed concepts and practices and beliefs that are actually applicable to like organizations out there, no matter what the organization does. And it's for me about kind of how does that all come together into a culture that's actually really supportive of the organization, because the culture is really for me a tool to help support the people that make the organization up. There is no organization without people, so it's really a tool to support the people. But yeah, there's distinctions. There might be some beautiful process things that could come out in terms of like showing those distinctions better. So that would be, I'd love to have those thoughts emerge if they do, and ways to make it clear and more fun. So that's really, I appreciate that. I'm complete.
Yeah, thanks for the openness. I think the main thing that's coming to me is like what we're co-creating as we go, I think, with it, which is I see a real benefit to these different layers of conceptual hierarchy, and yet in the field of a collective process, there's something that like having kind of a juicy, clear thing to like be sharing more, yeah, when we kind of got our hands on something that we all had something to say, like one piece that we all had something to say around. So I'm just thinking about like, okay, each of us sharing, whether it's a principle, whether it's a belief, whether it's a practice, whether it's, you know, which of those specific categories it falls into, I'm not sure, but like, what have you found? What has each of us found really enlivening and vitalizing in terms of organizational or community culture that we've participated in, and taking a chance to share that out, which is what we're doing here, you know, and
Yeah.
and then sharing that, and then that being captured, and then that might be really usefully, and I'm not sure I'm fully connected yet with where these 5 breakdowns of levels of complexity end up feeding into, but then that sharing from each person could be then further refined into those categories. I don't know if that is best accomplished in the collective field or not, but I'm just riffing. I hope it's a contribution. I don't mean it as, yeah, I just mean it as a brainstorm.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that may be interesting is it is actually, you just said something and it made me think of collective intelligence for some reason, but the experience of being in a group where you see collective intelligence emerge, and believing that it's possible based on the experience of seeing it. For me, I've seen it, and I never actually had that term for it until more recently, but I've seen the power of groups when everyone kind of his voice is heard, and it's sometimes it's frustrating for some members of the group, but it actually ends up usually creating a much better holistic outcome. And I think that's like a story piece that probably lots of individuals could probably point to their own personal stories on that. So.
I just want to riff off of that, actually, Kevin. Oh, Fernanda, did you want to go? Is it okay for me to riff off of Kevin?
Yes,
just to briefly say, it's like what Fernanda, you and Kevin, both of you have done, and is that you've both created an invitational space and really invited people to step forward in the way that you just said, Kevin, and your response to input from us has been invitational and sort of appreciative. And so with that, creating a field that's invitational of a leaderful, multi-perspective, of leadership, you're seeding the field for more collective intelligence. So I'm just kind of taking what you said and it's like pulling out. Okay, like there we are. We're identifying principles and practices that are conducive to collective intelligence or collective wisdom. So that's what I want to say.
No, thanks.
Yes, I want to. I love what is happening because it's such a wide invitation into, yes, our co-creation, which for me is so essential. Like I feel like as a society, we're learning what true co-creation is, and I'm so interested on that, on collective intelligence and co-creation, because this is as a first microcosm of what we want to create, and then part of the essential piece of VillageLab is that we're inviting. We have this central piece, this brain, together, this social organism that then will invite others and constantly feedback as a toroid from the outside into the center, from the outside into the center. So I love what is happening, and I love that we're thinking about the actual process so that we might be able to create a tool that serves us better and serves the whole. So I like the image that you brought, Carl, about, what I'm going to do is like name some of the elements that resonate with me, and that was the visualization of the ball that just goes and just floats, and then we catch and we just like play with it, but in a way that is a constant flow and a playfulness and aliveness that it's so beautiful and dynamic. I like the idea of thinking about a question that will then allow for the principles and the values and beliefs or whatever to start emerging from that question that connects to stories versus to our mind as creating a list for things, even though we can go there because we have those experiences. The other element I like is that then we could have some sort of mapping that would help us connect those and see it in a way that is truly nonlinear. And my adding piece would be, what if we would speak about, yes, what is the collective intelligence? What is the experience of the group in regards to that? But what is our experience in VillageLab? And what are we creating right now? What is the kind of culture that's already there? Like if somebody would come and ask us, what is the culture of VillageLab? What are the elements that are already present? So to see, like, with the kind of consciousness we have brought into what's already happening. And that would be my bites in regards to process. And I'll have to run and take care of a flow, and I'll take just a minute. And I'll pass the microphone to you, my love. Yes. You want me to hear the other stuff.
No, I appreciate what you were saying, Carl, and I'm super happy to be riffing off of each other. I think that's it's great. I think it's really fun. Another thing that just came to mind for me in terms of principles, and this is something I actually was brought this context recently, or this was explained to me recently, was the principles of, I guess, force, like not using force or coercion, and commitment combined kind of underlie civil and criminal law. So those principles underlying a system. So that, for me, was an interesting example of how you can think about principles. So the principle of commitment is connected to very much contractual law. And that's what contractual law is really all about. And not using force or coercion or violence. I mean, you could take it even further. No violence, force, or coercion very much connects to criminal law. So it's simple principles that can have systemic ways of operating.
And yeah, and it's funny how you naming that, Kevin, because the work that I do, a big chunk of it is around nonviolent communication, which really is premised on the principle that violence and coercion, force, those are all essentially stemming from the same. They're really the same impulse, and it manifests in so many different ways. In the sense that if we're truly being non-coercive, then we are holding the well-being and the needs and the voices of all stakeholders with care. And if we believe in interdependence of all life on the planet, it means expanding our consciousness and listening deeply and sensing into the field of the well-being of all life is actually an implication of what you're saying about no coercion. So I just get excited about that particular theme. So
I want to point out one thing that's coming up as maybe a helpful reference point or another aspect to bring into the process here, not immediately for us, but in the future for others, and that's to tie some of this conversation into or hold the awareness of the container or containers, maybe membranes is another principle to throw out. Where are we looking at this manifestation of culture, and what are the other context, I mean, what are the driving purposes or intentions? I guess when I want to go to the step of mapping this stuff out, those are questions that come up pretty strongly for me, and how do those things tie into what we've been discussing here so far? Like, what are the guiding purposes within a certain container or membrane of this cultural field? I mean, the analogies, metaphors get a little murky here, but we're talking about a social organism. Well, what defines that organism? Is this, where do you draw the lines? What is guiding? What are the other forces at work in this conversation that aren't on the breakdown of 5 categories that we have there so far? Because I think that's an important one. And also within one organization or organism, again, there's multiple membranes, and perhaps within a certain space or group, the culture looks and feels and acts different. And so how do we hold that awareness and work with that layer of mapping in this kind of conversation?
Yeah, that's an awesome distinction to bring up after what we were just talking about, because the thinking about the principle of not using force or coercion could be an element of an organizational culture. Not using violence may not be necessary for VillageLab culture. It might just be something that is important for a community, but not necessarily important for the organization. And because there's almost an assumption that violence is, the organization is not, may or may not have the capacity to deal with that. It's not part of the organization's mission, and how does the culture support it? So I think the distinction of membranes is it's just interesting as you expand the membrane beyond just VillageLab into a larger community or region. These issues of violence actually need to be included. So it's very interesting. I just wanted to throw that out there as a way to think about those principles and maybe splitting them up.
Can I speak? Yeah, it almost strikes me there needs to be like a 6th piece from the practices and the disciplines to structure, because I mean I think that's what we're after, is trying to get clear on how our beliefs and our values will dictate our structure. I mean, that's why we're trying to get understanding of our cultures, so that we can have the structure reflect it well, but the structure itself can be a conflict or set patterns that you're unaware of even before you make the process of doing the values and the beliefs, or you may not translate it well and be unaware. So it's almost like, for me, there's, like, you might have the principle of egalitarianism and nonviolence, but then the distribution of monetary wealth is unequitable, but nobody sees it, and I mean, so I'm just, there's some sort of structure piece there for me as well. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but just to say that.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, go ahead, Fernando.
Mention that one thing that happened to me as the process right now that went from Carl and Ben and then Kevin and then Jeff, and is that we were reading something that was very interesting, that was stepping into part of the work and also the process. And so Kevin gave that as an example of the coercion force, and then that meant something to you, Carl, and you totally lit up, and you mentioned interdependence of all life as a belief, and that has not been in our list, right? So as we go into that part of the stories, it's like we don't even have to mention, we go into stories and then we capture what of that was kind of the belief, instead of thinking of the belief, thinking of the story and the meaningfulness of that. And so I wrote interdependence of all life, and then Ben mentioned about the layers, and I was saying like, oh wow, from what I'm reading, there's so much. Some of these beliefs really touch all, or what I would love to think as affecting all the membranes or the people that would be interacting with VillageLab, right? And one of that is like really interdependence of all life, and that is like inside and outside, and it will say so much around our principles and behaviors around around that single belief. So I'm very happy to read that. We have 15 minutes to go, so I would like to have some minutes of silence. Let's say 2 minutes of silence, and that we go into a spiral of naming each of us. What do we feel next for our work together? What would be essential for our next step? Do we want to think about the process together? Do we have any of us an idea of what that process might look like? Um, what are those next steps? What is wanting to emerge from the center? What is our collective wisdom telling us in this moment? I'm gonna give us 2 minutes in silence for that, and we can speak from silence. So I'm gonna synthesize that question into what is emerging in our center, and how would I want to contribute, and the floor is open.
Well, I'll start. I sense two things. My personal is an appreciation for this thing that I'm sensing, which is, I think, the connectedness of the elements that we've been discussing, and how each of us have personal connections to the things that are already on the list that we've written down. So I I I feel a appreciation for that, and I also feel a sense of um, of me kind of wanting to let go, but also still be, because I'm coming from this. I'm wanting to kind of continue to just support and partner and serve. So that's what I'm sensing for myself.
My meditation focused mostly on the process because I have such faith in this group that will fill out the cultural map quite well. My first thought goes to, God, it's time for another retreat. We can do it in person. That would be so much more fun and effective. But we always can't pull together retreats with everyone. So I'm excited about what sort of graphic process could we use, maybe MetaMaps, maybe other tools. But I guess what I'm excited about is that this conversation has got us all on the same page with wanting to do a process that is more storytelling and weaving and building. And I think one of our challenges, and in a good way, in a bad way, but in a good way, is to see if we can use the internet technology to really create a space that matches the subtleness of that weaving. So that's just a challenge and a thought. And the other piece is that I really do think we should have a retreat soon, and maybe this would be done there. So.
What came to me was also an image of a visual representation of a lot of what we've been exploring. Something with colorful, like a colorful mind map with like at the highest level of sort of integration, or sort of most rough grained, like something like 5 to 7 core, whether it's principles or however you'd want to frame which level of would need to be, and then underneath that there might be a lot more complexity beneath that, but just like how to have a graspable, it seems like that 5 to 7 elements is about what the mind can wrap its head around in an easily visual cognitive way. And so like some kind of a map like that sure could have a whole lot more, a whole paragraph, or maybe even like a whole string and a whole outline of further complexity underneath it, but just something that in a graspable visual way can engagingly connect people with the essence of all that we've recorded here. And of course this further documentation is really of service, but that there would be something that the average person could just look at and be like, oh gosh, yeah, like that's cool, that's what they're about. So that's what comes to me.
Let's see, I could speak, I guess, in 2 directions. I feel the next steps for understanding and working with this process, and then also related or on a parallel track, understanding more or iterating on some of the work that we've already done around identity for the organization, and resurfacing, reviving this shared sense of purpose or mission and vision, these driving forces, and a little more tangible sense of trajectory or direction and process and sequence of unfolding and growth as an organism, because there are several interlocking circles here with different intentions, different purpose and pathways within this large sphere or organism of VillageLab, that I think it would be good to come to some clarifications and bring that onto our map, or a side-by-side visual map of the organism that we're working and playing with. And yeah, for the process, I think I spoke to that a little earlier, but I'd love to keep playing with this. Also, in visual form and drawing more connections. Be nice to get have like a little +1 or upvote way to add prominence to certain things that many people are seeing and resonating with that we've gathered on the list there, and kind of scale those up, and again just move towards coherence or sort of a consensus around a statement of these elements that we all recognize and resonate with and want to kind of put prominently on the map for, as Carl was saying, this shared understanding or way for people to recognize, understand what we're about, how we're operating, and how we see that, and how we want to be recognized and engaged with in the larger systems that we're playing in. So, cool, I'm excited. There's lots there, and
I know.
Be fun. And this is a great starting point. So.
Thank you, Ben. So I know that Carl needs to go in the hour, and I really would like to. I see that you opened the map, Kevin, so I wanted to not share it right now because we have 5 minutes to close the session, and I want to do the commitment of the 2 hours. And so my part of what's emerging is that unfolding of us creating and preparing an incredible process, not only for ourselves, but that we can then replicate with others. And I want to commit to hold the center for that and keep the momentum going, because one of the things that has been super good for me in the work with you, Kevin, has been that I told you, hold the center with me, because there's so much around VillageLab. I cannot hold the center if there's not another force that helps me keep it on the path. And then, Ben has been such a driver into collecting with ideas and creating documents and moving forward. So I want to commit to hold the center in the moment, to keep the work going, to do the harvesting. I am not the best in creating some kind of visual representation, but I'm sure that in between Jeff and Ben, people that I've seen that as a capacity in both of you, we could create something that would then help us create another process, and perhaps even sharing the process beforehand, so that even that becomes a collaborative process. So that would be what I would love to contribute and what I see emerging. And we have 3 minutes. So I would love to close with just some simple words about what are we taking from the meeting today. And that being both of statement and of a lesson for next time together. And complete. Floor is open.
I'll jump in since I'm asking for the timeliness. Thanks for the attention to that. Enjoyed the time together a lot. Some things that stand out are just, enjoying the sense of contribution of each person on the call, just the wisdom that shines through each of you. Really enjoyed getting more of a chance to connect with you, Kevin. Just really enjoyed your energy and contribution to the space. And yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just continued excitement. Just want to keep giving my acupuncture moments of when I can give my energy and attention to this process, because I realize it feels sometimes like it is just like an acupuncture amount of bandwidth that I sometimes have, but it's thank you all very much.
Yeah, I can go. I'm just coming away with great gratitude. I'm just feeling the team more. I mean, the subject was team, but just seeing us all on the screen together is just great. And so I'm excited to give you all a report about what we did the last week, because VillageLab is really rocking right now, and from our perspective, and just want to share that with you. So for me, what I'm coming away with is just an appreciation of the depth, like Carl said, and the wisdom of this team. And the chance to work together more is just delightful. So.
I'm excited to see where this goes. It's great to get on board with this phase of the coherence building, the culture craft for the organization, and also simultaneously on the meta level of looking at how does a wisdom-driven organization work and play and become self-aware in these ways and self-organizing and yet tapping into the larger field of wisdom and experience that's accessible internally and externally. And we bring a lot of both of those things here, so it's awesome. Look forward to the next steps.
Yeah, I love what Ben just said. I think that's amazing for me, this concept of creating a space and a container to support organizational consciousness and still allowing space for self-organization, because it really is self-organizing anyway, so it's just kind of keep the space open. It's really cool. I'm excited. And a map is awesome. I just threw up a little example of one of the concentric circles, but I think there's certainly some, sounds like already visions in your heads around mapping, so I'm excited to see what those look like.
Well, I just want to thank you all for your presence and say, okay, Carl, I know you have to go, so
Thank you.
I close the circle like that, just like having us together and blessing our time together and the work that we're doing. And I'll send an email to further the work and continue to hold space with each of you. Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.